That's how relationships are built. What's up, everybody? How is everybody doing? Joseph, what's happening?
How's it going, Mike?
I am glad to be back. A month away. I'm going to be a little rusty today, I'm thinking, because I think I'm still in like Greek island time and pace, if you will. But getting back into the swing of things, glad to be here. All right, so we got. I'm sort of going to play second fiddle to a certain extent today, Joseph. You're running the show. I'll do the intro, and because again, I'm just getting back into things. But we got a fun conversation planned here. Yep, we are back. So we're going to talk about content that starts conversations, and want to do some background stuff. But a couple of things came to mind as I was prepping for it this morning. We'll talk tactical things, and when we think about content that starts conversations, we have to think about topics and mediums and things like that. Two things over the last 2 days that I've done that helped me start conversations. Just throw those out at you. One is being timely. Just being timely alone can help you start conversations. I mean, I posted some silly thing about Meta's Threads thing. I joined, I posted the whole thing. Now I got at least one chat. I haven't checked my chat, LinkedIn chats in a little bit, but I got at least one going with somebody talking about it. Okay, so there you go. And that's not to mention the comments and whatnot. Now, I'm not saying everything. I'm not saying you should be headline chasing all the time, but that's something you could be looking at doing. Being timely is important. The other one is being aspirational, contrarian, combination of the two. So, as some of you probably know, I was on sabbatical for a month. We're traveling, and I didn't post at all on LinkedIn. I wasn't active. I didn't work. Nothing, pretty much. And I posted about it yesterday or the day before. I can't remember, and I got an insane amount of comments, things like that. That's great. But what I also did was I started reaching out to some clients and some prospective clients that I hadn't talked to in over a month, just to get conversations going. And I mentioned, hey, I'm back from sabbatical. I'm recharged. I linked to that LinkedIn post, and I can't tell you the number of people that responded within an hour going, a few just going, oh, I didn't realize you were taking like a full sabbatical. That's really great. It's awesome that you guys do that. Blah blah blah. And the conversation started from there. So. Long story short, like those are the types of things you can be thinking about, and we'll get into detail on later today. But before we dive into that, I think it's important to maybe a little bit of a refresher on why we're talking about conversations in the first place, and we'll go from there. So.
Oops, both hit it at the same time. I'll let you hit it.
Okay, I'm gonna let you run it. I'm not gonna touch it.
Well, you can drive the slides because you have access to it too. That way you can go when you're ready.
Perfect. So, in the intro to this, if you jumped on early, and I'm sure you've heard Joseph and I talk about this, we very firmly believe in this mindset of revenue is an outcome of great relationships, and unless you are in like SMB SaaS where you can run like strictly a PLG motion. Or if you're like in a low consideration type CPG environment, things like that, right? So this isn't true for everybody. But for the types of people that we're talking to, if you're a part of an organization has a complex consultative sale that you're having to do, the revenue that you generate is 100% going to be an outcome of great relationships. So I will die on that hill, if you will. It's a critical mindset to have to be successful in your go-to-market if you're in that type of organization. So the other thing with that, if that's true, right? If revenue is an outcome of great relationships, that means that marketing's job should be to build relationships at scale. You hear a lot of people talking about, marketing is sales at scale. I call bullshit for a variety of reasons. One is, again, unless you are in that type of environment where you're running just a PLG motion or you are in a like a low consideration e-com CPG type environment, something like that, which we're obviously focused on B2B, so that doesn't even apply, but I'm just throwing it out there as an example. In those instances, yes, marketing and sales at scale, fine. But if you are in a complex consultative selling environment, saying that marketing and sales at scale not only isn't correct, but it undermines the value that your sales organization actually brings to the table. Right? Somebody needs to get on the phone or on a Zoom or meet in person and shake hands and actually take the prospective customer through the sales process. Marketing can't do that. It can get you to a good point. It can help, it can assist, but it can't do it for you. It can't do the work that sales can. Yes, things are shifting. Yes, people don't want to talk to sales as early as they may be used to, although there's some nuance there. But the breakdown really needs to be marketing's job is to build relationships at scale. Start conversations and build relationships. And we'll talk about that in a second too. And then it's the job of sales to turn those relationships into customers at the end of the day. So, and when we think about that, it's not just decision makers that we should be looking at when we're talking about building relationships. You have to be looking at the entire ecosystem, the entire relationship ecosystem, right? So that's decision makers, influencers, internal and external, all the various layers of that, right? We talk about the relationship pyramid, which you see here. And the reason for that is why we talk about relationships is we want to scale referrals. That's what relationships allow us to do. Right? We ran I think the last event that I ran a little over a month ago was about this concept. So I'm not going to dive into it in a ton of detail. There's literally an hour-long conversation. We'll link to it after. I don't know if, Joseph, you want to pop the link to it or something in the chat here. But point is by focusing on the whole ecosystem, it allows us to build affinity across that ecosystem, which can drive referrals, right? That's the affinity referrals. That allows us to start more conversations with more of these people, which then, again, drives more referrals, which allows us to build relationships with more people, which, again, drives more referrals, right? So, and something to connect the dots here a little bit really quickly before we jump in, I think the core things that we want to talk about is, in the middle here is culture. And that's really important, right? So your culture is the ideas, your people, and the groups that you're part of. That's a core part of your culture. And I mentioned, as an example, my post around, Gabby and my sabbatical that we took. The reason why that fits is because it's a big part of our people first culture. So that shows to both prospective customers as well as prospective employees that might want to work at Proofpoint what we're all about. And it helps start the right types of conversations. So just want to connect those dots there. All right, I'm not going to belabor this point. Joseph just posted a link to the referral flywheel. Feel free to check that episode out. Ask questions if you want. After the fact, happy to chat to anybody. So we'll keep moving here.
Mike, I'm just posting it on LinkedIn because it doesn't go to there. There we go. Okay, so one other thing that I think is really important to emphasize as we're talking about relationship-led growth is that a lot of times relationship building is focused solely on the sales team, and then the more that a company scales up, the less focus there is on building relationships, and the more it becomes about how do we get people who are ready to buy to talk to the sales team, and relationships kind of get left behind altogether. Whereas relationship-led growth is really about everybody in your organization building relationships with people, and that's part of that referral flywheel. For that to be effective, it's got to be people on the marketing team, meeting people on the marketing team at other companies that you want to work with and collaborating with them on creating content together, or meeting other people who are influential in the industry. And then salespeople also have to be activating and building relationships with people. So if somebody is engaging with some kind of marketing content, the sales team has to be willing to build a relationship with somebody who's not ready to buy or is not an ideal customer, but they're an influential person, and it's everybody looking for ways to be building relationships that lead to these long-term opportunities, that's really when you're going to see that flywheel start to turn. When we're talking about relationship-led growth, there's really these three buckets of things that we need to consider, both from a content perspective, like what types of content do we need to build, but then also from a process perspective. How do we operationalize or build processes around each of these three buckets? And I don't necessarily want to call them phases because these operate kind of together, and that they can all be kind of, people could be having affinity, building relationships and starting conversations kind of all at the same time. But you need pieces of content and different processes for each one of these. So you have building affinity, starting conversations, and nurturing relationships. And a lot of times these three buckets are, in a lot of companies, are broken down by department. And so building affinity is usually something that marketing is focused on doing. Starting conversations is something sales is focused on doing. And then nurturing relationships, it kind of splits between the sales team to a point, and then it goes to the delivery team and customer experience to kind of nurture relationships from there. And what our argument is that you need all of these things to be working cohesively together, and you need marketing and sales to really work together in all of these different phases. And if you don't have both teams working in unison together towards the goal of starting conversations that lead to relationships, then either you just pit those teams against each other, and you have marketing creating content that gets people excited, but they're not ever starting conversations with people. Or on the flip side, you have the sales team who are only wanting to talk to people who are ready to buy, and they're not willing to work with marketing to create content that actually gets people excited and interesting to talk with the sales team.
Well, in larger organizations, it's broken down even into more silos, right? You have affinity that's often, parts of it are sitting with the brand team, parts of it are sitting with the demand gen team. Conversations, you've got your lead gen team, you've got then you have content that goes kind of across in pieces. You have your creative and design team. I mean, it gets really fragmented, and it's no wonder why a lot of it doesn't work.
Yeah, and then think of it from the perspective of the buyer. Like if you're wanting to buy something, if you see somebody's face when you're first introduced to the brand, and then you see them coming up from their personal brand content, and then you get on the call and it's the person that you've been seeing the whole time, you're going to feel so much more connected to that person. Or if somebody, I'll just give an example from today. I have different people that reach out to me occasionally to come on a podcast, and I have people who have reached out who have tiny podcasts, but I've seen them and I know them, or they were introduced from somebody that I know, and I'm immediately like, yes, I'm not asking any questions. I had somebody reach out to me yesterday who's like, I have a show, it's a top 5 podcast, and we have whatever, 1 million downloads a month, and immediately I'm like, I don't trust what this person's saying. I don't know who they are. I'm really skeptical of them from the get-go, even though their show might be much larger and more popular. It's because I haven't seen them. I don't know anything about them. So yeah, trying to build those connection points. So how do we build those connection points? I'm not going to dive super far into this, but on the affinity side, a lot of times that's things like creating blog content and virtual events like this one, podcasts. For some companies, it's thought leadership with writing books and things like that. And the goal of that type of content is to help people know, like, and trust your team long before they ever have a conversation. And that way they're already buying into your company. They like you. They really ultimately want to work with you, both because they already have affinity for your people, and they have affinity for the ideas and the way that you go about helping solve their problems. And so that type of content is really, really important because it makes it easy to have conversations. But where we would kind of split from a lot of the demand gen conversation that you see, say on LinkedIn, is if you're only waiting for people to come to you, you're missing a huge portion of the opportunity. And it's in my opinion, it's too passive of an approach because the buying window, the time that people are actually buying is really short. And if you're not in front of them in that buying window and you're not already having conversations with them, you're going to miss the boat. And then the other piece of it is if you wait to have a conversation with somebody until they're ready to buy, when they're ready to reach out to you, then they've already decided what they're looking for. And it's a lot harder to convince them to do something that is different than what they are already planning on. So if you can start those conversations months ahead of time, you can get that person to think the way you're thinking and buy the product that's actually going to help them, or buy the offer. Last thing on the affinity piece is affinity content is really where you see the inbound piece come in. So that's, you've created affinity and somebody raises their hand and says, I want to work with you. They could reach out through LinkedIn, they could reach out through a form on your website, and that's because you've built that affinity with them. But then there's this other piece of starting conversations, that's how do we make it easy for your sales team, or really anybody at your company, to reach out to people, to do outbound. So that's going to be getting people on your sales team, or getting people that are subject matter experts from your team to be part of that content creating process, and then creating certain types of content that make it really easy afterward for somebody from your team to reach out and say, hey, what did you think of this content? Or, we'll talk about that more in a second. And then the last piece is nurturing relationships. So then, we've created this affinity content. We've made it easy for people on your team to have warm outbound, where they're reaching out and it's easy to start a conversation. And then the last piece is you want to have ways and pieces of content that help you continue conversations. So you've already started a conversation with somebody, they're not ready to buy. How do you keep in front of them without just saying, hey, just wanted to pop this to the top of your inbox again, are you ready to start a sales conversation? No, it's just being in front of them and saying, hey, we have this event that's coming up that's really similar to one that you watched and we talked about in the past. I thought you'd enjoy it, whatever. So creating pieces of content for that.
When a lot of the time what we see people run into issues with, if you will, especially I would say on the affinity side, is they treat a lot of these, whatever you want to call it, pillar content or whatever you want to call it, as one-offs. It's sort of like this, it's a one-off. If you build it, they will come, right? They'll write a book, they'll post about it, they'll do your kind of the traditional book promo, and then that's it, right? Or they will, they'll run an event, and it's sort of we're going to promote the event, we're going to have people attend the event, and then we have the recorded event, and that's it. Same with podcasts, same with their blog content. They'll write it, they won't do anything. So then I'm not just talking about repurposing strictly, but it's connecting the dots in terms of how do you actually leverage a book to help you start conversations. Right? Yeah, sure. Somebody might read that book or read an excerpt from the book and reach out to you directly. That's inbound. Yes, great. But I've seen people do some really creative things from a book perspective, and we haven't done this for anybody, but I've seen it where you crowdsource some of your book content. So you get people involved in the actual creation of said book. Maybe they provide stories or anecdotes that you could use. Maybe they provide data, whatever it is, right? And you can get people involved in the creation process. That helps conversations get started. You can send out your book for free and have people, obviously leave reviews and things like that. That's sort of some of the basic stuff. You can repurpose some of the book topics into blog posts, as an example, or into event topics, right? And connect everything together. So it's a lot about kind of connecting the dots and leveraging it to create that flywheel, if you will.
Yeah, just to kind of round this out, I would say the part that is the most challenging to get teams to activate on is the last piece of this puzzle that's really important. So let's say you're doing all three of these things. You're building affinity with people. We'll just say you've got a podcast going, you've got a live virtual event going, you have somebody on the sales team that's going to reach out to some of those folks afterward, and they're going to continue nurturing. The piece that really pulls it together is, how do you distribute this content more effectively, and how do you make it easier for people to reach out to your team, like as easy as possible? So then there's these two other layers that are really important to layer on. So you've got distribution through paid ads, through your company, social, and then some outreach from a salesperson on your team. But then on the top side, you've got the personal brand content, and that's a way for people on your people build relationships with people, ideas, and groups. And so if all the content is only coming from your company and you're sharing your ideas, yes, people are building affinity with your company's ideas, but it's really important to have people build relationships with different people on your team. And the more people on your team that are talking about your ideas, and the more that they're seen on social through building their personal brands and commenting and engaging with people, it gets your content in front of people way more often. It gets your ideas in front of people way more often. And then also it gives a lot more sources for people to go to when they're ready to buy. So, yeah. I don't know, Mike, if you have another thought on personal brands, because that piece is...
Yeah, I mean, it really gets to the core of the relationship or the referral flywheel, which is, again, that thing in the middle is culture, and that's ideas, people, and groups. And the more people you have activating, the more visible your culture becomes. And really, we actually had an interesting conversation with Allison Netzer about this on our podcast. The episode just came out, I think, this week or last week. I can't remember. And, culture is synonymous with brand. I think the mistake people make is they separate those things out. But the reality is your culture is your brand and your brand is your culture. And if you think about it that way, that ideas, people, and groups thing starts making a heck of a lot more sense. And the larger portion of your employee base, no matter whether you're a small organization of 10 people or a large organization of 5,000 people, the more of them that are authentically out there talking about ideas that relate to your business, the more visible that culture and that brand becomes, and the more affinity you can build to that culture and that brand. So I think that just as a general concept, that's how I would connect those dots.
Yeah, and you're going to build affinity much faster and more and deeper if it's being seen. If somebody sees 3 people from your company and they follow them consistently on, let's just say LinkedIn, that's where we spend a lot of our time. If they're consistently seeing that same message from multiple people, it's just going to resonate more than only coming from one voice at your company or from the company page itself.
Greg asked a great question. What do you do about salespeople who don't feel confident about generating their own content? Happens a lot. And I would say there's 2 sides of it. They either don't feel confident or they don't see the value in you spending their time on doing so. Those are obviously 2 different things, but 2 sides of the same coin, because at the end of the day, they're not going to do it. We've developed a solution specifically for that to make it a little bit less daunting for really anybody, any kind of SME, whether it be sales or engineering or whatever, to do it. And really the idea there is to collect asynchronously short video snippets to then repurpose through either video content or written content, etc. So we can pretty much help people create that content for them, and you do it by sending them prompts and things like that. So like your marketing team in theory could take the same approach, right? There are a bunch of tools you can do to collect this. We use a tool called Story Prompt. It's not like it's secret sauce. There are a bunch of other tools that do similar things. Send them a link, send them a prompt, either video or text. They record it. Now they pretty much answer your question, and then now you've got content you can provide to them with some fairly minor editing and ghostwriting and things like that. There's obviously things you can do through AI and things like that to make the process better, faster, all that kind of stuff. But at the core, you still need your SMEs to say things themselves, because otherwise it's inauthentic. I personally don't believe in complete ghostwriting. I know people do that. I just think once that conversation actually starts, you automatically, inevitably will see that disconnect. I mean, I've had that a couple of times before where I was interacting with accounts like authors who actually they had their books ghostwritten, as it turns out, and their content was also being ghostwritten. And then you get on the phone with them, you're like, that is not the person whose thing I just read. You could tell. Like, no matter how good that ghostwriter is, I've yet to see it where you can't tell that, and you automatically, that relationship all of a sudden now is starting on a lie, as far as I'm concerned, and I just don't see how that works. So I don't know, Joseph, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say there's one other element, and that's this, and this is one that we can't really strike on too much in this conversation, but I think applies to really effectively growing relationship like growth model. Is it also goes down to how the sales team is compensated, and if your company is just totally focused purely on revenue, and that's the only factor or the primary factor that sales is going to be judged on, then they don't have time to create content, and there is no incentive then for them to be doing something that's good for the company, but is ultimately going to hurt their quota, and so their direct pay. I think a lot of the way that quota is built out ends up creating perverse incentives for people. I mean, I've been in a sales role, and it's really hard to do the right thing when you know that you're going to lose a bunch of money by doing what's right for the customer and doing what's right for the company. And I'm not perfect. I try to lean that way, but it's hard to do that. So your incentive structure for the sales team and how they think about going about building relationships makes a huge difference for how they interact. So maybe think through that as you're building out those compensation structures. So you're thinking about sales roles. I'll just say one more thing on this, because I just saw somebody post yesterday or the day before about, hey, they've been trying to find somebody for this role and they've been really struggling. It's a sales role, and they're saying, we want somebody who is able to close deals and able to do business, but they're not going to be super salesy. They're not going to be super pushy. They're not going to be, doing that. And they're willing to create some content, and they're willing to do these different things. And what we call that is, what my role is the director of growth, somebody that's over looking at marketing and sales and how they work together under one team, and not the opposite to that is your CRO, your chief revenue officer. And to me, that's kind of the wrong direction to go, because instead of taking things and saying, okay, how do we holistically grow our business across marketing, sales, and ultimately your customer experience, and make sure those all work together in creating something that's less transactional, more meaningful for your customer, and helps you grow in the long run. Instead, it's saying, okay, how do we cut costs as much as possible and turn sales into transactions, and that leads to quarterly discounts and all that kind of stuff. Instead, it's like, hey, let's take the long-term approach and really help grow. And in order to do that, you need your sales team to be building long-term relationships with people and taking that route.
Yeah, one other thing I'll add to it, Joseph, I'm going to try not to get us too far off topic, although we kind of already are, which is, it's got to be more than just compensation structure and incentives. I think that's where a lot of companies go astray, is they think that just the financial incentives, if they build them right, it solves this problem. It doesn't. This is where it ties back to culture and business models. If your business model requires you to do these things, it doesn't matter what incentive structure you put together, somehow you're going to end up in the same spot. And if your culture isn't built around doing the right thing for your customers, and that's a very broad generalization, then you will inevitably end up doing all these things that you talked about anyway. The bad things, if you will. So, as an example, I'll give you, we have a client we work with in the consulting space, and part of their model is they already plan for churn. They plan for, okay, at some point, the company that we work with is going to build up their internal team. So instead of trying to fight that and try to continuously make ourselves indispensable and all this kind of stuff and keep making recommendations and whatever, we're going to help them hire. That's a revenue stream, but it also is it's a way to manage that churn more effectively from a cash flow perspective. And that takes that incentive to try to keep that client for life out of the equation. So your salesperson or your account manager or whatever no longer has that responsibility and knows that that's not part of the business model, knows that's not part of the culture. No, it doesn't matter what the incentive, even if their incentive for whatever reason is still whatever, all about upsells and whatnot, they know that at some point the end is coming. So again, I know that takes us kind of well off topic, but it's still all about relationships, and it ties back to one of the concepts we talk about, which is everything we're talking about. Yes, it's content that builds conversations, but it all ties back to culture at the end of the day, culture and brand.
Yeah, and how do you create? We have to get beyond thinking about things in terms of marketing and sales, and thinking about how do we grow the company. And in order to do that, it automatically leads into some of these bigger conversations. And it's where the clients that we've really seen do well and be the most successful are the ones that are willing to take a look at their entire company and how they think about growth, versus saying, okay, we want to bring in a partner to help us with marketing. Like, we can do that, and we have offers that are really helpful. But at a certain point, it's like, well, if you want to grow your company, marketing is only one piece of that. Then we start looking at the sales side of things. And then once you're looking at sales, you have to go, okay, well, how do these work together into our company culture? And are we delivering on what we promise? And can we use what we're delivering on to feed into the kind of content that we're creating? And if you're not looking at marketing, sales, and delivery kind of as one overarching idea, now I understand that as you scale, the complexity of that gets to be really challenging, but you have to be thinking about these things to be successful.
But it is interesting to see, we're talking about fragmented teams and whatnot. You see, growth is a marketing function in a lot of organizations, which makes absolutely no sense to me. Growth is a company initiative, not a marketing function.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah. So let's pull this last slide up, because I keep going too far down.
This is what happens when I come back from vacation, Joseph. I just start yakking.
I'm gonna hold on. Why is this not pulling back up? Mike, do you see the slides? Those are gone now, right?
Hold on, I'll pull them up. That was me. Just a different layout.
Just want to get this last slide on, just so there's a little bit of a reference. So, all right. So getting back to creating content that starts conversations. There's different kinds of content that we've seen can really help to do this. I figured Mike and I can just kind of riff on this a little bit, but the different types of content that you need that really helps start conversations are personal brand content, first of all. And when it comes to what we're doing from a marketing perspective, is we're creating an evangelist program for our team, where I'm working with multiple people on our team to be creating content for their personal brands. And a lot of it's relevant to their job. Some of it relates to what we do here, but it's just helping people on our team be more visible. And from an individual perspective, it helps the people on our team grow in their career. It's growth opportunity. It's building into our people first culture from that perspective. But it also is one of the best ways for us to distribute our message and show that our people on our team in different areas have competence and that they're leaders in their space and what they're doing. And then it makes it a lot easier for them to refer people or to get conversations coming inbound. So personal brand content is huge for creating content that starts conversations. Then you have your co-created content, so that'd be inviting people to come on podcasts, inviting guests to come on your live stream events, collaborating on articles or social posts, or featuring people in newsletters. And then video content, you've got live streaming, like what we're doing now. You've got point of view content. You've got videos you could create that are answering frequently asked questions that come up in the sales process, industry expertise, opinion content. All of those different pieces can really help to start conversations. And then finally, there's conversation magnets, which are going to be a piece of content like a worksheet or a process template or a calculator or something that's going to be useful for somebody's job, to make it easy to be able to send people and then have a good reason to follow up with them afterward. So yeah, Mike, I'll leave it there, and we can look at. Oops, you're on mute.
Put myself on mute. I think it'd be great to just riff through some examples. So I wrote down a few before we jumped on here to mention. So I think there are a few things to keep in mind. Two I already mentioned when we started, right? Like being timely and taking advantage of headlines and things like that is something you can do. Now, I've seen companies and people go astray by only doing that. Now, unless you are strictly a creator whose entire brand and channel is about, the latest in tech or whatever it is, then that can't be the only thing that you do. And I've seen like big organizations do that and just keep grasping at the latest, whatever the latest regulation or latest this or latest that, and they just end up being all over the freaking place without any kind of cohesive brand message, any cohesive, narrative. So it works, but that can't be the only thing. The other one is, aspirational type content, contrarian type content works in general, but it does have to be authentic. Preston, yes, we are. We haven't yet, but we will. Where was I on that? Oh, so a couple other examples. We've got podcast guests listed on here. Man, I can't even tell you the number of times that co-creating content, inviting people onto our show, has allowed us to build relationships, both with that person, but also with other people. So, a couple recent ones, a couple of our most recent episodes. One was with Allison Netzer. I mentioned her name. Literally a couple of days after we recorded, she messaged me and said, "Hey, have you heard of so-and-so?" I said, "No, I have not." As it turns out, he wrote a book, and he worked with some really high-profile people and brands and things like that. And it was all about how culture builds revenue and all this kind of stuff. So, guess what? I'm chatting with him. I can't remember when, but pretty soon it's coming up. And now we're starting, building that relationship, and that's allowing us to build our presence more on that topic because we very much believe that, and we have all sorts of things we're doing there. Jamie Hines, after I chatted with him, you can check out his interview if you want. He's a CMO at a tech company, and I asked him like, "Hey, is there anybody else you think would be interesting for us to chat with?" Well, he literally sent me a list of like 8 people. He's like, "Hey, happy to make intros," right? So now I've got those conversations going. So, and again, it sounds really simple, right? But you have to have the experience there that supports that, because if you invite somebody on your show and they have a bad experience, or they don't think that they were given the opportunity to kind of show their best self, if you will, and things like that, they're probably not going to be interested in giving you referrals, right? And those are just a couple examples. I ask for recommendations pretty much all the time, and that could be, I've done both. I've asked for recommendations for other people to have on the show, or if the conversation ends up going down the kind of what we do rabbit hole afterwards. We usually don't do it on the show itself or before. Then I'll ask, "Hey, anybody that we should be talking to that would be interested in this?" Right? I've gotten conversations started that way. So that's a really important thing. And again, this is where you have to be thinking about, how does a podcast fit into your overarching growth strategy? How does a podcast fit into your referral flywheel? And you have to build a process around it. You can automate some of it. You can have automated email follow-ups that say, "Hey, thanks for coming on the show. If you know of anybody else that would be a good fit, here you go." And you can even send them to a form. I've seen people do that. That can work well. Those types of things. One other thing I'll mention is be different, like radically different. So, for us, as an example, this entire concept of a relationship-led growth, that's our way of being different. And it's not just different for the sake of being different. We actually believe in it. We activate against it. This is, we run our marketing this way, et cetera, et cetera. So all our content that's related to it is our way to be different, which does start conversations, because people go, "Oh, I never thought about it that way." So, Joseph, any other examples or ideas?
Yeah, I think the ones that I've seen build the best relationships are on the co-created content. Even on this show a couple weeks ago, we were talking about personal brand building, and I have 2 people or 3 people that I know that I've been building relationships with for a while. that I had jump on. And then, that's doing a few things, building a deeper relationship with them, helps them stay in the loop of what we're doing. And all three of those folks interface with people that are in our ICP all the time. So a way for me to continue building relationship with them, it gets them exposure. So I'm kind of doing them a favor and exposing their brand while they're doing me a favor by kind of lending their influence to our company. And we get more credibility from doing that. And then, just continues to build the relationship. And then people that are joining that live don't just get perspective from our company, and it's not just our word at that point, but it's, helping to build strength into these concepts because it's other people who are activating and doing the same thing. So definitely the podcasts and shows are where I've seen the deepest relationships built. And then, the other piece that works really well are those conversation magnets. Now it has to be just the right thing, and we're actually working on that for ourselves. And it's hard. It's hard to develop one that is really going to be meaningful, but it's basically a tool that somebody can use to do their job more effectively, where they're able to apply the concept that you're talking about. And if you can nail that, I saw one that somebody posted yesterday. I've seen ones on ChatGPT, and they've gotten a lot of traction, like whatever the 20 phrases that you should use, or whatever prompts that you should be using, or content. I've seen some content calendar templates for social media people that are really good. Like, how do you build that out? What do you need to be thinking about? It goes with the video, and then they have this, really baked out template that you can apply. So, those can work really well because it gives a reason for somebody on your team to reach out and say, hey, did you have any questions about that? Or, hey, I'd love to take 20 minutes and look at that with you. And it's easier to turn that into a sales conversation than I think almost any other kind of content.
Yeah, I think an interesting way to think about those is ask yourself the question of, would I want to have a conversation about this? I know it sounds silly. It's literally in the name, conversation magnet. But I think this is where, somebody like, I know I've had somebody else ask me, well, isn't that just a lead magnet? Aren't you just renaming the thing? No. Like, yes and no. And this is where, I think a lot of, when we go through some of these things, people will ask, well, isn't this just the same thing? I can throw the word relationship in front of it and say I'm doing relationship marketing, relationship growth, or aren't you just doing the same things? It's like, well, tactically you can make that argument, but the mindset is what matters. And we talked about that mindset in the beginning, right? Revenue is an outcome of great relationships. So if you focus on relationships, which relationships happen through conversation, then you will execute differently. The tactic itself might be the same. Yeah, it might be what somebody would call a lead magnet, or dare I say, an ebook, right? And you see this all the time. The same exact people that I see on LinkedIn yelling about, oh, ebooks are stupid and they're waste and gated ebooks and this, that, and the other. They're the same ones that are doing the whole, hey, I created a guide on this thing that I thought of. DM me and or make a comment and I'll send it to you. That's the same freaking thing. You just gated it through a LinkedIn post, right? Now, if it's valuable enough and it starts a conversation, great. There's nothing wrong with it. So it's all about the right mindset and then executing based on that mindset. But as long as you can get rid of this whole thing of I'm doing this because I need a lead, that's what makes it a conversation magnet. Again, ask yourself, would I want to talk to somebody about this? Would it be a valuable conversation to have?
Yeah, and I think we'll have another live down the road where we can dive into this topic a little bit deeper. But I think another question is, does it show some sort of intent for the person to solve the problem? Not that it's going to show like intent that they're ready to buy or something like that, not that extreme. But are they trying to solve the problem that you help solve? And if they are, then that piece of content should be really meaningful. And if they're not, there's no reason that they would download it. Like something that really helps them actively solve a problem that you directly help with. Because then, essentially you can get on a call with them, look at that worksheet, give them some pointers, and then it genuinely is helpful for them. They could take it, they could implement it on their own. But then the last piece of it would be at the end of that conversation, you go, hey, would you like any more help with this? If they say yes, now it's a sales conversation. If they say no, you've built relationship, you've helped add value to somebody, and built rapport. What kind of metrics? Are you pulling something up for that question, Mike?
How'd you guess? Yes.
Okay. Mike's going to pull up a slide for this, but yeah, what kind of metrics do you put around your approach? I had a slide in this deck that was exactly that, and I left it out because I didn't want to overcomplicate the topic. But Mike will pull it up. I mean, overall, because Mike will pull it up and it'll go on this, but if we go back to one of the earlier slides, he's also got control of those, so I can't pull it up very easily. But you have building affinity, starting conversations, and nurturing relationships. So we break down measurement into those 3 buckets, and you really want to be looking at all 3 of those at the same time. So we don't measure off of leads or MQLs or SQLs. We're really looking at, are we effectively building affinity with people? And we're looking at, there's different metrics depending on what customers are running, but you've got your podcast downloads and things like that. Well, actually, I might be able to go back to it. Yeah. You got your podcast downloads and paid ad engagement, and there's qualitative scores you could look at, like, are people mentioning the podcast or mentioning your shows or things like that on social? Are they mentioning your show and social? That's showing that they're building affinity to your point of view. And then on the starting conversations part of things, that's where you need the right back-end pieces in place and the right tech to measure this. But you're going to be measuring forum fills. You're going to be measuring conversations that are started through LinkedIn. You're going to be measuring conversations that people are having. And then finally, on the nurturing relationship side, you're really looking at, okay, are those conversations turning into pipeline and revenue? So when you're measuring those pieces all the way through, then you're able to see, okay, we're building affinity. That's a really early indicator. Then, okay, I'll let Mike take it from here with the slide. You're on mute, Mike.
There we go. Greg, to answer your question, this is at a high level what we look at from a metrics perspective. Also gives you kind of rough timelines and things like that. But a couple core things I'll point out. We look at correlations to market activity and brand traffic increases at the affinity stage. I mean, other things too, like engagement numbers and things like that as well. We also will, something different that I don't hear a lot of people talk about is we want to look at outbound conversion response rates. So, because again, we're talking about organizations that have complex sales cycles, usually a consultative sale. And what we're trying to do is, while again, marketing is not sales at scale, as I mentioned at the beginning, but it can assist in the sale process and it can help build relationships. So the idea there is, if marketing is doing its job, outbound, if done well in the right way, not the spammy crap that we all see and can't stand, your conversation response rates should increase. So we look at those things. And the other thing that's a little bit different is we specifically focus on referral pipeline and revenue, because going back to the concept of the referral flywheel, which again, feel free to take a look at that episode if you haven't seen, in terms of get details on the concept. But the idea is, if you do this right, relationship-led growth allows you to turn referrals into a sustainable and scalable channel. So that is a core part of understanding how much of our pipeline and revenue is coming from referrals. And you want to see that go up, and you also want to see the percentage of that from as a percentage of your total pipeline revenue go up. So Greg, hopefully that helps. Joseph, I think you're on mute now.
I'm on mute. Jeez. We're struggling on that today. Yeah, I think that covers most everything that I had in mind for today. If there's anybody that has any questions. Greg, you've had a lot of questions. If you have any other ones and you want to jump on for a second, we'll throw a link in here. We just have a couple minutes left. You could jump on live if you want. And
Yeah, and Greg, like I mentioned in my message, if you or my comment or whatnot, if you want to chat one-on-one, happy to chat.
I'll post this here. So if anybody wants to jump on live in the last couple minutes and ask any questions you want, or if you have a specific situation where you're trying to figure this out, we could brainstorm with you here for a minute. But yeah, I just think it's kind of interesting because the more that I talk with people in the B2B space, it's this kind of SaaS model that's being pushed, and it's because of the way the business models are built around. Okay, you have the board that's now, a company grows to a certain point, they get funding, they get a board, the board wants to hire a CFO, and then as you start having those dominoes fall, they're looking at more transactional things. And so then there's this whole methodology around sales that isn't really about whether you're going to grow your business in the long run. It's about showing short-term growth metrics that you assume if you're hitting these short growth goals, then you're going to be able to hit these, 2-year, 5-year growth goals. But then the challenge is you're going to have diminishing returns with that model at a certain point. And the companies that are really successful at using that model would be these really big companies that have a very established brand. And then they switch over to this very transactional approach, but they built so much brand reputation that they can get away with it for a while. And so basically they're just selling out their brand reputation for short-term gain. If you're a smaller company, you're going to have a really, really hard time doing the same kind of cold outbound that like Salesforce can do. Salesforce can do some pretty crappy cold outbound and still have success because there's people who are out there that go, I need to buy Salesforce. I'm in the market to buy it now. And then a Salesforce rep reaches out with some crappy cold message and they just talk to them because they want to buy Salesforce already. That's because Salesforce has built this reputation over a long time. That same process of cold outbound, getting a totally brand new green SDR and expecting them to be able to reach out to 100 people a day, leveraging your brand and that not hurt your reputation in the long run and actually lead to business is, to me, really backward.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you bring up the CFO and finance. I've been on sabbatical, but I think about this stuff anyway. And something I've been thinking about a lot is that this again gets back to this whole culture piece in my mind. Like everything ties back to culture and brand. Culture equals brand, brand equals culture. And a lot of the time what you see is different parts of the business are not tied into that. So a lot of the time it could be finance, right? So, it's all about numbers. The CFO comes in like, oh, well, where's the ROI on this, that, and the other? We actually got to do these other things because they're easier to measure. And it gets away from what's core to your brand and your culture, like you mentioned. But that's why that happens. And it creates this, what's the word here? This scenario where you have a core function of your business that's not supporting your brand and your culture. Sometimes you see that with HR, right? Where the way that they're doing recruiting and the way that they are, the brand, the personal, the employer brand is separate from the corporate brand and all this kind of stuff. The wrong people come into the organization, the culture changes or it goes against the culture that's been built, stuff like that. You see it with marketing. You see it with sales. We talked about that already, so I'm not going to repeat it here. So I think it's, I know the topic here was content that drives conversation, but at the end of the day, that core concept of culture and brand and marketing's job is to build relationships at scale. I think those mindsets have to be there before anything else can change. Otherwise, all you're doing is just tactical execution, which is likely to fail.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the things that we're talking about don't work if you're trying to generate sales qualified leads for the sales team. And they don't want to talk to those people until that person's ready to buy. If that's your model, what we're talking about, it's not going to work. You have to have a sales team that's bought into building relationships in the long run. And that's really, more of a culture thing than anything else. But Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Mike, do you have any last thoughts before we wrap it up?
That was my last thought.
Okay.
I'm
Well,
going to leave it
thanks.
at that. I said something, I think, relatively smart. Let's stop there.
I love it. Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Really appreciate you all jumping on, and we'll be live again in 2 weeks. So we will see you guys then.
See you, everybody.